So I want to talk about a bird. Not this bird. I like this bird. I want to talk about Nadu, the legendary creature that draws cards and ramps really, really well. But before we talk about Nadu, I want to talk about a commander I do really like. This is Kineas and Tyro, which was one of the face commanders of the Commander 2016 precons. The card design itself didn't really speak to me, so I never ended up really building my own paper version of it, but I still really liked the face commander. Fast forward to the beginning of 2022, and two Wizards of the Coast senior game designers, Gavin Verhey and Melissa DeTora, are doing a series on Gavin's YouTube channel, Good Morning Magic, where they analyze and review each of the year's Commander precons. Back then, there was only one set of precons per year, so it was super easy to do. Nowadays, where there's a new precon for every single set that comes out, and there's like 30 of them every single year, it's not doable. But back then, it definitely was, and it was cool to see them. As a super invested Magic the Gathering player and a person who turned this into my own career even, I get super nerdy every time I listen to Gavin or Melissa talk about just the game design, the behind the scenes workings on all my favorite products. So I absolutely love hearing them talk, and it's one of my favorite series on YouTube. So I'm going to have a link to it in the video description. I highly recommend checking out Good Morning Magic and the series as a whole. So in the video covering the Commander 2016 products, Gavin asks Melissa to give her first impressions of Kineas and Tyro, and this is what she had to say about them.
Thoughts on KNT, Melissa?
All right, yeah, so first I'll say it seems like there's a lot of card draw and ramp going on with these cards in general. And I think that, having also made this mistake before when I was designing Commander cards for the first time, I think this is a very easy mistake to make when designing Commander cards. Because when you think about, okay, what do Commander players want? What are the most important things in Commander? And the answer is card draw and ramp, obviously, but putting card draw and ramp on the same card and having it just be very easy to get both that card draw and ramp can lead to cards that are doing that too much, So that's just kind of my spiel about that in general.
So Melissa criticizes Kineas and Tyro for doing both card draw and ramping way too easily, which she even calls a mistake in game design. Basically, if a card does both card draw and ramp really, really well, and you get the value out of the card draw and ramp too easily, like you don't have to work for it, then Gavin and Melissa both consider that a design mistake, at least in 2022 when they were reviewing this product. Now, when this video was released at the beginning of 2022, there was another commander that just recently came out, I think a couple months before that. It was Prosper, and Prosper Tombbound is basically card draw plus ramp on a stick, and way stronger than Kineas and Tyro were. So I went on Twitter and I asked Melissa what her thoughts on Prosper was now that she just did a full retrospective on the Commander 2016 product. And she told me on Twitter that she also considers this one a design mistake because it's too easy to both ramp and card draw. And keep in mind, for Prosper, you do have to jump through a hoop, I guess, by casting stuff from exile, but Prosper himself already exiles a card every single turn, so in a very easy turn cycle, you're at least casting one spell for free, so you're drawing one card for free off Prosper, and then whenever you're casting that spell for free each turn, you're making a treasure, so you're getting the ramp and you're getting the card draw, at least one of each, every single turn incredibly easily just off the same card. And then beyond that, you're not helping your opponents like Kineas and Tyro were, and also you can possibly generate a lot more treasures than just one per turn off Prosper, because anything you cast from exile will generate more and more treasures. So compared to Kineas and Tyro, Prosper is very power crept for the card draw and ramp. And sure enough, it became very, very popular. And I think it's still the most popular Rakdos commander out there. And it's sat there since its release, basically. But now in 2024, we just got Nadu, which is a legendary creature that makes Prosper and obviously Kineas look like jokes, like amateurs when it comes to drawing cards and ramping. Nadu just blows them out of the water. Not only is the card draw aspect of Nadu just so much better because it goes into your hand. You don't have to cast it until end of turn or anything like that, like Prosper does. You don't have to give your opponents free land drops or card draw like Kineos and Tyro though. And then you don't get treasures, you get straight up just lands entering the battlefield untapped with Nadu's ability too. And while yes, it says it's limited to 2 per creature, if you have anything that has like a landfall trigger ability that just puts a creature onto the battlefield, guess what? That's another creature you can be targeting with Nadu's ability. And we all know the Shuko and Lightning Greaves equipment thingy with Nadu, so you can start triggering its ability for free instead of actually, spending mana and actually, working for it. So Prosper is a power crept Kineos and Tyro, and then Nadu comes along just 2 years later and is a super power crept version of Prosper. And if you think about it, the power creep between Kineos and Tyro, which was a Commander 2016 product, and Prosper is roughly like 5 to 6 years. And then you look at the gap between Prosper and Nadu, which is just a 2-year difference, and the power gap is way bigger between Prosper and Nadu than it was between Prosper and Kineos and Tyro. So what happened? What is going on with Commander? Now, to be fair, Nadu is printed in Modern Horizons 3, which is a set that is marketed towards modern players. These are cards that are too powerful to show up in standard sets, and they want to just throw them into the modern format to shake it up and basically soft rotate the format. So it's easy to brush off a card like Nadu and say, well, it was never actually meant for Commander players. This is a card that they wanted to be very good in Modern, so it had to be powerful enough to survive in a modern format. But that's not really true. Nadu is a legendary creature, and also the modern main set has been marketed directly towards Commander players who are by far the largest consumers of Magic product right now. And being legendary is a very good indicator that it's supposed to have Commander appeal. So Nadu is already having a serious impact in Modern. There's even talks right now that maybe Nadu has to be banned at some point, but it's too early to tell. The metagame is in flux as everybody's trying out the new cards. We're gonna have to wait until the Modern metagame settles before we can really draw any conclusions. And if it does end up being too format warping or whatever, too dominant, Wizards of the Coast will eventually ban it and things will, settle down and return to normal. Nadu is also, unsurprisingly, making a big splash in Commander, specifically the CDH meta, where it's already proving itself to be very dominant of a deck. And I'm sure it's also going to be steamrolling casual tables as well, because it's an obviously incredibly powerful commander that's really easy for newer and veteran players alike to understand just how powerful it can be. But unlike Modern, where it will be banned if it becomes a problem, in Commander, it probably won't be banned. There's like a slim to none chance that Nadu is ever going to be banned in Commander, so it will just end up being yet another busted Simic commander that people in the format just have to put up with, basically. Now, people have been calling Nadu a design mistake, and I think it could be also the case that it's a design mistake, but I don't think this was a fluke nor an exception. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more Nadus coming up very soon, and I'm going to be exploring why in this video. So let's look at the steps that we took to get here, starting with Commander's beginnings. Commander, originally known as EDH, started off as a casual format that you could play to take a break from the usual regular competitive 1v1 formats of Magic that were dominant at the time. One major appeal of the format was that you had a home to play all the janky cards that would never make it in a 1v1 competitive environment. The EDH rules were specifically designed to facilitate you being able to play your janky cards. It's multiplayer, and you start at double the starting life total at 40 instead of 20, which is effectively 6 times the starting life total of just 1v1 20 versus 20, thanks to having 3 opponents at the table. So you have way more time to cast your big splashy spells that you would never have a chance to cast in 1v1. You'd be dead way before you had any chance to cast your Godsire or whatever. 100 card singleton also meant that you have way more space to fill in your jank because there's just only so many good cards you could throw into your deck before you start having to filling holes with just whatever you have in your binder. And the format is eternal, which means you could play with whatever cards you want, whenever you want, without fear of rotation. But more on that later. This casual, low-stakes beer and pretzels format stood in stark contrast to all the 1v1 competitive formats, where basically you have to play all the best cards, otherwise you're just not going to be playing much Magic at all. And to the surprise of no one, this appealed way more to the casual Magic crowd, which is actually the vast majority of Magic players. This is something that isn't really talked about much, and is something that I think most of us invested Magic players don't even recognize that much. The fact that the vast majority of Magic players are what are called so-called kitchen table Magic players. I believe that's a term that Mark Rosewater uses to describe them. These are people who have never once signed up for a sanctioned event, any sort of kind, like a draft or a pre-release or any sort of thing like that. They just buy like boosters or maybe like a box every once in a while, and then they'll build decks out of whatever cards they have on hand. So they just play with what they own, but they don't play any sort of format. They don't play Standard, they don't play Legacy, they don't play Commander. They're just playing with the cards that they own in any way that they so choose. Mark Rosewater even says that less than 1 out of every 10 players have ever signed up to a sanctioned event, and he considers that probably the vast majority of those players don't even know what a Commander format or any format is. This isn't a phenomenon that is unique to Magic the Gathering either. If you're looking at any very large, growing, thriving nerd hobby community, the vast majority of them are going to be the ones that are ultra casual, the ones who play at the lowest, most casual settings and are staying away from the high-end or competitive scene. So I think a more casual format of Magic, more casual than 1v1 competitive at least, is kind of inevitable to becoming the most popular form of playing Magic outside of kitchen table. And Commander's early philosophy of play with whatever you've got, just bring out the jank, enjoy yourself, very low stress environment was perfect for onboarding a lot of kitchen table players who had no interest in doing 1v1 competitive into actually trying out a constructed format. Because really, they were already playing with what they've got. They were already playing with the jank. So this was just a very easy step into a constructed format. It was very easy to onboard them. And that was the key to its success and early adoption. And then the player run format started to grow. So as Elder Dragon Highlander, which is what it was first known as when it was just player run, as it started to grow in popularity, Wizards of the Coast took notice of it. And when it grew sizable enough, then Wizards of the Coast moved in to capitalize on this new format. So they rebranded it as Commander instead of EDH, and they introduced it as an official format by starting to print out Commander precons. First, just one set per year, basically, starting in 2011. And that's actually where I started playing Commander 2. I started with the very first set of precons, Political Puppets, with Zedru as my commander, and I still have it to this day. Initially, cards that were made for Commander were left specifically for the Commander set product. Though a few cards were cropping up now and then that were clearly made for multiplayer Magic, showing up in the main sets, like Sylvan Primordial. I remember that each year's precons were actually a really exciting and anticipated time, because every single time they released a new set of precons, they did something super unique and interesting with the format. These were the sets that introduced us to big game changers like the Eminence mechanic, the Partner mechanic, and also Planeswalkers as commanders, the very first set of Planeswalkers as commanders. They were maybe not all super well received after some time by the community and might have been a little bit controversial, but they were definitely very exciting and different. So we got many years of Commander set precons, and then eventually in 2019, Wizards of the Coast tried a different variant. They tried introducing the Brawl variant. It's basically a simplified Commander variant where you start at lower life totals. You start at 30 instead of 40. The library size is smaller too. It's it's 60 cards instead of 100, and your commander can also be a planeswalker or a legendary creature. But the biggest change was that they restricted the card pool. Instead of making it an eternal format, Brawl was a standard legal format. So the card pool you were working with was only standard legal cards, and they would rotate in and out based on what is legal in standard. In my opinion, Brawl looks like a much more appealing variant of Commander for Wizards of the Coast. It's much simpler thanks to a much smaller library size and card pool to work with, which means it's easier for new players to get onboarded into the format compared to Commander. And because you could only play with standard legal cards, which back then was 2 years worth of cards, the last 2 years worth of cards. Now they changed it to the last 3 years worth of cards. That means that your player base will always have to buy the latest set of cards to keep playing Brawl. The other big bonus for Brawl over Commander is that by following the standard rotation, you kind of sidestep the issue of power creep. You don't have to worry about constantly printing more and more powerful cards to have your player base replace their older cards with newer ones and keep buying the latest boosters. You can just wait until older cards are replaced naturally by rotation, and that way your player base will continue buying the latest cards regardless. But unfortunately for Wizards, Brawl was basically unanimously rejected by the Commander community, at least for multiplayer. And that's because it went against one of the core appeals of the format, which is play with the cards you've got. They wanted an eternal format where they can play with their janky old cards that they never saw a home for. So by Wizards of the Coast saying, hey, play a rotating format and replace your older janky cards with the newer cards we're printing at any given time, it just didn't fly with the multiplayer Commander crowd. It wasn't what they were looking for when they joined Commander. So honestly, multiplayer Brawl, I don't think ever had a hope of really taking off like Commander did. However, it did end up finding a home on Arena, where 1 versus 1 Brawl has a thriving community that really enjoys the format there. But for multiplayer Brawl, it didn't work out. So Commander kept becoming more and more popular, and slowly but surely it became the format that the majority of constructed Magic enjoyers flocked to over basically any other 1 versus 1 format. And some things that happened, in the early 2020s kind of accelerated that, like the lockdown from the COVID pandemic, F.I.R.E design, basically destroying standard and destroying any interest in playing it. Thank you, Oko and friends. Many other factors kind of accelerated Commander's growth, but it was always on the uptick, and I think it would have reached the current heights eventually. Just, the pandemic times and F.I.R.E design kind of just accelerated that a lot. And now Commander is by far the most important constructed format. It is by far and large the format that all Magic players are playing, and therefore it is by far the most important format to cater to in terms of boosting revenue. So now that Commander has dominated the entire Magic franchise, every single set must be designed for Commander. Instead of before, when we just had one Commander set every single year, now every single set comes with Commander precons attached to them, and the main set itself is usually just designed for Commander players too. Just look at the legendary count on all the latest sets, you'll see why. There's even entire sets dedicated just to Commander, like Commander Legends and Commander Masters, and just comically, Modern Horizons 3 not only was marketed towards Commander players, of course, but the precons that came with Modern Horizons 3 are not modern precons, they're Commander precons, and just funnily enough, it just so happens there are Modern Horizons 3 cards that are not modern legal because of that. So now we have Commander products and Commander cards everywhere. There's a precon for basically every single archetype, usually multiple precons for an archetype if it's popular enough, and nothing is super exciting anymore because by the time they finish previewing one set of Commander cards, they're already hyping up the next set of Commander cards. Like literally as I'm recording this, Modern Horizons 3 has just released a week ago, and we're already deep into Assassin's Creed territory. And as soon as Assassin's Creed is finished being previewed, we're going to be talking about Bloomburrow. And the reason why everything is Commander now, and we have more products than ever before, is obviously capitalism. Wizards of the Coast is owned by Hasbro, and Hasbro is a publicly traded company, and Hasbro shareholders want the line to go up every single year without fail. In fact, Hasbro CEO talked publicly about doubling Wizards of the Coast's revenue in 5 years from 2018 to 2023. And when Wizards reached that goal early, the CEO started immediately talking about doubling that revenue again. This is also a time where Hasbro's other products are struggling massively, so there's more pressure than ever before for Wizards of the Coast to get that line up as high as possible to carry the weight of the other struggling franchises. Hasbro has recently come up with many different ways of making that line go up every single year. Universes Beyond has done a great job at onboarding new players who are fans of a different IP to try out Magic the Gathering when that IP shows up in Magic. We see this obviously with Lord of the Rings, which came out last year, and it was already a couple of months ago the second most profitable set of all time. And the second part of the strategy is, well, printing more product. There's a great increase in the amount of product being released every single year now, a term that I heard called Firehose products, where they're just like shooting them out as quickly as possible. It's a term I find funny. These strategies have been working tremendously well for Hasbro shareholders. They're making record-breaking profits year after year. But the thing is that every single year they must top themselves. So if Lord of the Rings was the best-selling set of all time, well, they have to top it in the next year. And the year after that, they have to top that. Like, there's no end to this. They have to keep increasing profit. And that's the scary part. The priority here is very clear. It's short-term profits over long-term health of the game. Now, more product in itself is not a problem. However, keep in mind for an eternal format like Commander, Firehose release schedule, where we're just getting a deluge of products, means a rapid acceleration of power creep in the format. Now, Magic will always have power creep in eternal formats. That's just the nature of the beast. When you have a non-rotating format and you introduce more and more cards to that pool, even if they're intentionally not trying to make them more powerful than previous versions of cards, just more variety yields stronger synergies, better combos, and the power of decks go up over time. It's just natural. So even if designers were trying to avoid power creep, if you have an eternal format like Commander and you're like quadrupling the rate of new cards being released every single year, you would expect basically quadrupling the rate of power creep in Commander 2. Firehose design also stretches development time and research potential thinner, yielding less time to develop and playtest new cards, and it will hurt the quality of the overall product. We've seen also an increase of cards that are just not working the way they're intended on the card wording and need like emergency errata. Like, for example, Wheel of Potential was one of the latest cards that just doesn't work as the card is written. At the beginning of 2020, I think it was like 2019 or 2020, Wizards of the Coast implemented something called the F.I.R.E design, where they were just basically trying to make the most powerful, exciting cards possible. And guess what? That ruined standard. Like, this is why we got Oko, for example, and why people still have PTSD about green decks. There are ramifications, and like standard died. It was a dominant format back then, and it just straight up died. They killed it with F.I.R.E design. And sure, F.I.R.E design did sell boosters because you needed those cards to play standard or modern, whatever. Throne of Eldraine, I'm sure, did very well financially. But then the long-term ramifications of that, oof. We also see the push design of Modern Horizons products, basically making Modern into a soft rotating format. Like, you get to keep your fetches and shocks or whatever, but then the rest of the cards in your deck have to be swapped out every single time they print a new Modern Horizons. And that's intentional, and that's great for Wizards of the Coast, but is that good for Modern? But at least with Modern, they eventually ban cards that are too game warping for the meta. Whereas for Commander, it's a lot trickier, because if a card shows up in Commander, gets printed in Commander, it's basically there forever because the rules committee for Commander is incredibly reluctant to make any changes to the format. Like, they got rid of Hull Breacher, and thank goodness. I thought that was an amazing decision on their part, but they didn't ban it because it was too powerful. They banned it because it was a stacks piece, and they don't like stacks cards, and it was very popular because it was powerful. But if something's powerful and popular, that doesn't mean it's going to get banned. It probably won't. Like 99% of the time, it won't get banned for that. But if it was stacksy and popular, then, you know, it's on the list there. So power-crept cards are indeed very exciting, and it's natural to get very excited about that. I myself, you know, I'm guilty of just being super more hyped for like Modern Horizons 3 than I am, you know, Assassin's Creed, you know, Universes Beyond aside. But there are ramifications for the long-term health of any given format. And I think power creep is actually kind of ruining the fun of Commander, or at least the initial appeal of it. More and more power crept staples means the older, jankier cards that people used to run a lot in Commander, like the pet cards, for example, that never had a home outside of the Commander format, those cards are just not able to compete. So they are replaced by the newer staples. Those cards are just power crept out of the format. And that kind of sucks because that was the initial appeal of the format, right? It was to play your jank, but like the jank just doesn't cut it these days. It also means that if you're a casual player who hasn't updated their deck in a very long time and you roll up with that deck to your local game store, you might not be able to find a play group that can play at your power level. You might have just been power crept out of the local game store meta. Even by precons, the latest precons might be able to just stomp your casual deck that you haven't touched for a couple years that was fine a few years ago. And I'm not complaining that precons are too powerful. I think that's really good for onboarding new players. You want to have new players have a deck that is as good as it can be for its price tag to, you know, immediately go and play at local game stores and have a fun time with it. But what I'm saying is the rate of power creep is so fast that we're seeing, you know, from 2022 to 2024, for example, the Prosper to Nadu situation, where the precon that they buy now might not be good enough in like 2 to 3 years, and then they have to buy the latest precon, which, I mean, Hasbro loves, that's great for them, but is kind of a turnoff for Commander because the main appeal of the set, again, was that we could play our jank. Like, we could go into our old binders and find the cards that didn't have a home, and now we can play in Commander, and that's increasingly not being the case anymore. In that sense, Commander is kind of turning into Brawl. Like, Wizards of the Coast was upset that we didn't pick up Brawl instead of Commander, which was their nice rotating format, standard legal format. And instead, they just turned Commander into Brawl, right? It's now a soft rotating format where, you know, you have to keep buying the latest sets. And if you're a couple years behind in sets and card upgrades, then your deck is just way weaker than everything else. And that kind of sucks. That really sucks. Also, the Firehose product release schedule means that if you're an invested player, it's almost impossible to keep up with all the cards being released at a given time. And in fact, with my Magic the Gathering friends who are very casual players, they basically only play Commander when I'm popping back into Canada or whatever. That's like the number one complaint I hear from them is like the release schedule is way too much. And they always complain to me, unprompted by the way, that the release schedule is way too much. And they really hate how many products are being released at any given time. It's product fatigue. And if I mention that to some of my friends in Wizards of the Coast, they say basically the same thing, which is just, you know, oh, not all products is for everybody. Just focus on the products that you like and ignore everything else. Not everything is made for you. And my rebuttal to that is always, well, first of all, invested players don't work like that. Their brains don't work that way. And second, and most importantly, yes, we do, because Commander is a multiplayer game. So if I don't know what the latest cards are and my opponents are playing the latest cards, I still need to know what those cards do. So I do have to keep track of all the new mechanics and all the new set releases because I'm going to be playing against people who are running those cards. So I need to know what is happening in the game. And that's also another complaint I hear from Commander players. The fact that there's so many new cards, so many new mechanics every single year, it's getting increasingly more difficult to keep track of what's going on in your own Commander game, and you just kind of have to tune it out. You have to just hope that whatever your opponents are doing on their side of the battlefield is all legit and legal, and then you look up at your own board state and ask every once in a while, am I dead, or how much damage am I taking? And that's not good for the game. You should be able to keep track of everything going on, and the product release schedule is making it harder. And then in terms of complaining about power creep in Commander, the most common rebuttal is basically, well, Commander is whatever you do with it, right? Like, Commander has always been a broken format, so you always have to just find a playgroup that matches your own power level. And I think this is a valid point when you have a regular playgroup, because the regular playgroup can, over time, just naturally match each other in power level, take out cards that they deem too powerful, or maybe power up a deck that is a little bit too weak to match the rest of the playgroup. It's all well and good, but not all players have access to a regular playgroup. A lot of them run at local game stores where they're doing pickup games, or they're doing games on webcam over Spell Table, for example. And for those playgroups, the power creep that kind of seeps into the local metagame, even if it's just like the latest precons, means that no, it's getting increasingly much harder to play your older, lower power decks. And I would also argue, even if you do have a regular playgroup, if people are just naturally picking up the latest cards and upgrading their decks, well, the power creep is going to naturally occur. And that's normal, again, for an eternal format like Commander, that power creep is just naturally going to be happening as more and more cards are released. But the rate of power creep is my problem, because the rate of the number of cards that are coming out and power crept cards coming out is ever increasing. Again, look at the 2-year difference between Prosper and Nadu. Firehose product release schedule means that they have to churn out a crazy amount of precons every single year, and that means that basically every single archetype in Commander will inevitably get a precon, probably 2 or 3 precons, that are specifically designed to make that archetype even better in Commander, and will come with a bunch of brand new design cards specifically for that archetype. And this deluge of new cards that are designed specifically for your chosen archetype paradoxically makes decks less diverse. No matter your specific archetype, be it energy or assassins or dragons or what have you, you're going to be getting a whole bunch of new cards that are specifically designed for that archetype. So they're going to be designed to be staples, to be auto-includes for your deck, which means if you're putting those cards into your deck, and why wouldn't you? They're designed for it. You have less space to brew and innovate with your own Commander deck. And this is initially a great thing for onboarding new players again. Like, let's say you have a new player who loves angels. Well, wouldn't it be great if they just had an angel precon so that they can immediately start enjoying Commander with the archetype that they actually like? And that's obviously a very good thing. And also, new upgrades for your decks are also very exciting. Everybody gets hyped to put in some new cards into a deck. It keeps your decks feeling fresh, at least for a little bit. But long term, I think it defeats one of the core appeals of the format, which is play your jank. Play with what you've got. As someone who is an avid brewer, much of my joy in Commander is derived from assembling unique decks, finding archetypes that other people aren't really exploring, and putting together cards that were never intended to be put together. I enjoy brewing those decks more than I enjoy even playing Commander. I absolutely love it. And in fact, I turned it into my career. That's how much I enjoyed it. And that's basically how your first Commander decks in the early days of Commander, that's how those decks were assembled. And of course, even back then, there were obviously popular Commanders, that had their own cards that were considered auto-includes. But there was also a significant chunk of that deck that, couldn't be filled with auto-includes, and you had to just kind of figure out what you want to do with it. You had to put your own unique spin on the 99. But now every single archetype, no matter how small or narrow, is going to be getting its own precon, and then eventually probably 2 or 3 more precons after that. And each of those precons are going to be coming with like 10 to 15 brand new cards designed to be staples for that archetype. So the number of cards that you actually have to think about and put your own unique spin on is vanishingly small. The precons are doing all the deck building and kind of upgrading for you. And again, this is great for onboarding new players, and it's great for people who don't really care about brewing in general, right? Like, not everybody actually enjoys the brewing aspect of Commander, and I totally get that. Some people just want to play the game. They don't want to spend the time, assembling a deck from scratch. It's not enjoyable for everybody. Some people just want to play. And I totally understand that, and I totally get that, and I understand that precons are very valuable in that regard, and I'm happy that they're around. That's how I got into Commander myself even, but it does come with a cost, and that cost is deck building freedom. And deck building freedom, building your own deck from scratch, was one of the initial appeals of the format. And now there's an ever shrinking design space of brewing your own decks that don't already have a precon already assembled for that archetype. Like, speaking from my own experiences, I used to have an Animar morph deck, but I shelved that deck. And the reason why I shelved it is because they released a morph precon led by Kadena with a bunch of Sultai cards that are just made for the morph archetype. And it kind of felt silly to keep running an Animar morph deck when the Kadena deck is doing the morph stuff just way better than it. And same thing, I had a Grixis Zombies deck led by Thraxamundar, but like, why would I keep playing Thraxamundar as my zombie leader when I could just play, Wilhelt instead? And it does the job better. It's more zombie specific, and it draws you a lot of cards in the process, right? And honestly, I'll be pretty bummed when they eventually get around to doing a precon on my favorite archetype, Changelings, probably coming out in 2026, I assume. Because, like, again, I got really excited brewing what I thought was a very unique deck, and I spent a lot of time trying to take cards that were never meant to go together, and I made them work in one of my favorite decks of all time. But, eventually they're just going to have a precon that does all the work for you and runs all these must-have staples in it, and the deck building joy of discovery is gone. And after they make the Changeling precon, I assume they'll make a Call Draw precon too, where the commander just enters the battlefield, finds all 3 Call Draw pieces from your library, graveyard, exile zone, whatever, and puts them directly onto the battlefield, and then also probably will draw you cards and ramp whenever you cast an equipment, something like that. Very exciting designs. All right, so conclusion time. In my opinion, Commander is quickly accelerating away from the initial appeals that made it a popular format. The speed of power creep is accelerating at a lightning fast rate, and there's no signs of it slowing down. And that means the jankier pet cards that Commander was initially billed as a home for are no longer being able to cut it at your normal playgroups. And the brawlification of Commander, this soft rotation of always increasingly more and more powerful new cards that are coming out at an ever increasingly faster rate, is something that the Commander community initially pushed back on when Brawl was first introduced to them. Like, we wanted it to be eternal. We want to play with our older janky cards. But now Brawlification has happened. Like, Commander is Brawl kind of now. That's just a new reality. And deck building diversity trends down as we have an ever increasing card pool to work with, because the precons and just current Commander design is making sure that every single archetype will have a slew of must-have staples designed for that specific archetype. Also, thanks to power creep, all these new precons for archetypes basically need a commander now that both easily draws cards and ramp, because previous power creep has allowed so many of those commanders to seep into the local metagame, so all the new commanders now also have to draw cards and ramp very easily without that much work, just to keep up with everything else. So my conclusion is that Nadu is not a one-off mistake. It is the expected result of Firehose product release and intentional power creep that has just inevitably brought us Nadu. And at the rate we're going, Give it 2 more years, and I'm sure we're going to have another legendary creature that makes Nadu's abilities look cute in comparison, just like how Nadu makes Prosper look weak in comparison in the span of 2 years, and Prosper made Kineas and Tyro look weak in comparison too. Now, this video sounds like all doom and gloom, and I apologize for that. It's something that I've wanted to talk about for a very long time and get off my chest, and Nadu was a great way of me actually getting off and pulling off this video. And also, despite complaining about Commander and the direction of the format for the entirety of this video, I actually do love Commander still. I'm enjoying it every single week. I play weekly at my local game store, and sometimes I also host Commander nights here as well too, and I generally still love Commander. It's still my favorite game to play. It's just the long-term direction of the format that gives me pause, and I hope things change in the near future. And I'll also say that not every single set is super power crept. In fact, 2 of my favorite sets in recent memory, the first one, Baldur's Gate, is notably, I would say, a lower power level than other sets that came before or after. And I also, despite never playing a single Assassin's Creed game and not really caring for Universes Beyond at all either, I love the Assassin's Creed set in terms of card design, and that one was also intentionally simplified, and also the power level was curbed down because it's aiming on onboarding Assassin's Creed IP enjoyers and not really focused on selling new cards to Commander players in general. And these type of sets give me hope. I hope they do well, and I hope we see more of those type of sets in the near future rather than more like Modern Horizons 3 sets in the near future. All right, so that's all I got for now. Sorry for a long, rambly video this time. I'm going to go back to the fun stuff coming up soon, I promise. Like and subscribe if you like this sort of stuff, though, or like and subscribe if you like my happy hat. And I'll be back next time with a cooler video, I swear. Okay, bye.